In this video, I'm going to show you how to get Sega Master System, Genesis, Sega CD, 32X, and Game Gear games up and running on Xbox Series X and S using Retroarch. The Sega Genesis. I have come to love this system so much over the last few years. Back in the 90s, I grew up with a Super Nintendo, but a bunch of my friends had a Genesis, and I would love going over to their houses and trying out different games that I didn't have access to, like Dune 2, Sonic, and of course, Phantasy Star 2. Over the years, I would pick up numerous Genesis compilation collections and play them on things like the Dreamcast, Xbox, and anything else that came out on Steam. And now, thanks to emulation, we could play a multitude of Sega games on Xbox Series X and S, including Genesis, Master System, 32X, Game Gear, and Sega CD. So let's dive in. So the first thing we're going to need is to source games for all of the available systems that we want to play. So Master System, Genesis, 32X, Sega CD, and Game Gear. There are a variety of different ways to dump your own cartridges from these systems, and of course, Sega CD games can be ripped just with the normal CD burner on your computer. You can also find your games on the shady parts of the internet, but as always, I will not be providing links, as that is illegal and will get my channel in trouble, and no thank you, so just don't even bother asking. I will delete any requests for links. Now, do note for Sega CD games, if you want to run them from USB, they do need to be a single queue and bin file. If it has multiple bin files, those do need to be stored on the internal Xbox SSD. But if they're a single bin queue, they could go on USB just fine, which is what I'm going to be demonstrating today. If you need to store your games internally, be sure to check out my dev storage mode tutorial where I go over how to do that. Once you have your games sourced, just copy them over to your USB drive. Once you have your games placed, there is one more file we need to get Sega CD games up and running, and that is a Sega CD BIOS file. I have a video on my channel on how to dump your own Sega CD BIOS using an EverDrive and your real Sega CD hardware. Otherwise, you will need to, again, resort to the shady parts of the internet to get this file, which, again, I will not be providing a link to because, again, illegal. No thank you, I will not risk my channel for this. But once you have a Sega CD BIOS, it needs to be named BIOS_CD_U.bin for North American Sega CDs. If you have European or Japanese games, you will also need a Mega CD BIOS for those regions and name them accordingly. But for me, I only have North American games, so I'm sticking with just my one BIOS_CD_U.bin file. But once you source the required BIOS files you need for your Sega CD games, just put that onto your USB drive as well. Once that's finished copying, you can close out of everything, take your USB drive out of your computer, and put it into your Xbox. Once your USB drive is inserted into your Xbox, it should pop up automatically if you've used this USB drive on an Xbox before. But if this is your first time inserting a USB drive into your Xbox, it will pop up with a message asking you if you want to format the drive to use on Xbox or use it as media storage. Choose media, otherwise everything that is on this drive will be deleted, and that's not exactly what we want to have happen here. But once that drive is in place, we could go ahead and boot into My Files Explorer. If you don't have this, I will have a link to it in the description below for you to install it. Once My Files Explorer is booted, we're going to go to Removable Storage Devices. We're going to go to Disk E. And now we're going to scroll through our thumb drive until we find our Sega CD BIOS. It should just be at the bottom if you have put all of your games into folders. But press Start on it. Copy File. Now we're going to navigate over to the left here and click on Isolated Storage. From here, navigate up to where it says Packages here in the navigation bar. And now we're looking for a folder with a bunch of numbers and letters, and that is our Retroarch folder. So for me, it has always been this top one. You might have a couple of different ones. You could just explore them to find out which one is the right one. You could do so by going into it, going to the local state folder. And if it has all of your stuff here, that is typically a good confirmation that you're in the Retroarch folder. Anyway, go to System. And then we are going to press Start on our controller. Do it up here if you have a bunch of files in your folder like I do. Just go up to the top here and press Start. And then click Paste. And now our Sega CD BIOS is in our Retroarch system folder. After you have that BIOS file in place, we could just go back out to our home screen and load up Retroarch. Now, just as a quick reminder, this is a continuation from my original Retroarch install video, so you will need to refer back to that video for initial Retroarch settings that I'm not going to go over in this video. But now that that's out of the way, we're free to begin loading up content for all of our Sega systems. So you can do this either by going down to the Load Content tab, scroll to your E drive, and then just selecting a system and loading up the games. Well, you'd press A on it, select a core, and then it would load, but this is a really annoying method to me. I do not care for it. I think it is slow and obnoxious, so instead I'm going to show you how to make playlists for each of these systems. So pressing right or left on your D-pad, you could go to the Import Content tab over here. From here, we're going to do a manual scan. I'm going to start with Game Gear, so Content Directory, E drive, Game Gear Games. Scan this directory, system name, press right on your D-pad to scroll down to Sega, and find Game Gear. Default core, so for this tutorial I'm using Genesis Plus GX. So I'm going to select that. And then if you have your games sorted into subfolders, make sure Scan Recursively is on. And if you have your games compressed in zip folders, you want to enable Scan Inside Archives. But once you have that set, you can start the scan. And once it's finished, there should now be a nice little Game Gear icon over on the right. There's mine. So there's my 3 whole Game Gear games I've owned my entire life. But now I'm going to do the same for the other systems. So manual scan, content directory. I'm going to choose 32X games now. Scan this directory. System name, Sega 32X. Default core, so Genesis Plus GX does not support the 32X yet. So for 32X games, we are going to be using Picodrive. And then same as before, if you have a bunch of subfolders, make sure Scan Recursively is on. And if you have them compressed, make sure you turn on Scan Inside Archives. But once ready, hit Start Scan once again. And when it's done, you should have a nice new little 32X playlist over here on the right. Now, same thing once again, only this time for another system. Alright, we're going to be doing Sega CD. Scan this directory, system name, Sega Mega CD, Sega CD. And we're going to go back up to Genesis Plus GX because it's just got better compatibility than Picodrive does. It's just we can't use 32X on Genesis Plus GX yet. Next, we kind of want to do something about file extensions here because if you do this type of scan, it will pick up every bin and queue file, and that's not something we want. So for the file extension, add .q and press start, and then make sure Scan Recursively is on if you have subfolders, and please do not have your CD images compressed, they won't work. That's just not how it goes. But now we can go ahead and start the scan. And now when we go over to the right, there should be a nice Sega CD playlist here. That includes my one Sonic CD game here. Awesome. And now we're going to do it once again for yet another Sega system, this time Sega Genesis. Scan this directory, system name. This time we're going up to Mega Drive Genesis. Default core, Genesis Plus GX. File extension, we need to delete this. There we go. Then make sure Scan Recursively is on and Scan Inside Archives is on if you have them compressed. And then start scan. And when it's finished, we'll have yet another Sega playlist entry over here that includes all of our Genesis games. And finally, let's do it one last time for Master System. So manual scan, content directory, E drive, Sega Master System, scan this directory, system name, Master System Mark III, default core, Genesis Plus GX, scan recursively, scan inside archives, start the scan. And when it's done, you'll have a new Master System icon over here that'll include your Master System games. So there we go, 5 new playlist entries here. So Game Gear, Master System, Genesis, Sega CD, and then 32X. But now that these playlists are made, we can just select a game and tell it to run. We're going to start off with Master System. And here we are, playing Sega Master System games on an Xbox Series X or S, and it is just so much fun. Love Phantasy Star. And now a quick test of Genesis games. And Genesis games are running just as you would hope they would. Like, this is just fantastic. Runs better than the Genesis Mini. And now a quick demonstration of Game Gear. And Game Gear is running exactly how you would want it to. Very, very nice. I really enjoyed Lion King in most of its iterations. So many people hate this game. Really made me sad the Game Gear version wasn't included in the recent recollection of these games. Now, how about that 32X? Loads up perfectly. And I'm not gonna lie, the 32X version of Doom is actually kind of fun to me. Like, I know this version gets bashed on a lot, just because it sounds like a loud, wet fart, but hey, I mean, for a console version of Doom from the 90s, like, it runs really well. Like, this runs better than the Jaguar version, Super Nintendo version, definitely better than the 3DO version. Like, this is a relatively good experience. And finally, Sega CD. These ones will take a little bit longer to load up just because of their size, but as long as they're single bin/Q files, they will run perfectly from an external drive. But as I said earlier, if you have multi-bin Sega CD games, they do need to be placed on your internal Xbox SSD. And if you have your Sega CD BIOS in place, it will boot right up. And there we go, Sega CD games up and running on an Xbox Series X, along with Master System, Game Gear, Genesis, and 32X. Like, this is just freaking awesome. So for those of you who looking to get these games up and running on your Xbox Series X, that's really all there is to it. You just need games and then a Sega CD BIOS file if you plan on using Sega CD. If you're not going to use Sega CD, the BIOS file can be completely ignored. But you also got your games playlist set up so you can run them easy, and you're just really good to go. You can even do 2-player, multiplayer games if you just hook up another Xbox One controller or Series controller to your console. But now we're going to go over some of the core options available in Genesis Plus GX and Picodrive. We're going to start with Genesis Plus GX, as that is what 4 of our 5 systems are using. So going into our quick menu, we can scroll down to Options. And our first available option is choosing what hardware our system is running on. This should automatically choose the correct hardware type, but if for whatever reason it's not, you could set this manually here, all the way from the SG-1000 up to the Mega Drive. You should be safe to leave this on auto, but in one of those rare extremes where the game will not run correctly, you can try setting the system manually. Next is System Region, so you can choose between NTSC-U, NTSC-J, or PAL region games. So a lot of Genesis/Mega Drive games actually had multiple region support on their cartridges, so you can actually swap between the regional variants here. So like if you have an NTSC-U game, You could change to NTSC-J and see like the Japanese title screens and all that fun stuff. Like, it's really cool to mess with. Next is system lockups. Leave this on unless you know you have a specific bootleg or homebrew game that needs to have it off. Ignore system boot ROM. Then CD system BRAM. We want to change this from per BIOS to per game. The Sega CD's internal memory is very small, so you can only save a couple of games to it if you want to have it as a per BIOS thing, so definitely change this to per game, so that way you don't have to worry about running out of space. 68K adversary, leave this on. Cartridge lock-on, we're not going to go over. If you want to play things like Sonic and Knuckles plus Sonic 3, just patch your game. It's a lot easier than trying to deal with cartridge lock-ons. Just save yourself the headache. Next, you can set if your master system is using an FM synthesizer chip. I like to turn this on personally. Next is the Genesis sound chip. So there's a couple different options here. There's the MAME versions, and so 2612 is the original Model 1 Genesis sound chip, and then the YM3438 is the later models. So there's two different types available here. There's MAME and then Nuked. So MAME is less accurate, faster to use, and then Nuked is more accurate and sounds more like the actual hardware, but requires more processing power. The Xbox Series X and S are powerful enough to use the Nuked audio backend, so that's what I prefer to use, so I have mine set to Nuked YM2612. Next is the sound output. You could change this between stereo or mono. Next are some preamp levels for the audio. This is a little above my level of caring, to be honest. Like, it sounds great to me as is, so I don't mess with this stuff, but for you audiophiles out there, you're gonna love these. And then the same thing with the audio filter. You can enable a low pass filter or have it off. So with it on, it will sound more like an original Model 1. I don't really care either way personally, so I just leave it off. And then you could change the low pass filter percent as well. Now this next option is really cool. It is the Blarg NTSC filters. So this lets you change your image to imitate either a monochrome screen, a composite video input, S-video, or RGB. I like setting mine to RGB as I have an RGB modded Genesis, and it looks pretty representative of what my actual hardware looks like. Next is an LCD ghosting filter. This will mimic the Game Gear and Sega Nomad screens. Really cool if you want an authentic experience when playing Game Gear games. Next is borders. We're going to skip this, and then Game Gear extended screen. We're going to skip this as well. Core provided aspect ratio, leave this on auto. Next is the interlace mode 2 output. So you can change this between single field and double field. Double field is more accurate to what you will see on real hardware, but single field will be a lot more pleasant on the eyes on a modern display. Up to you which one you choose. I like double field personally. The next couple of options are all having to do with light guns, which unfortunately I can't get to work on Xbox Series X or S yet. I have not gotten a single one of the mice I own to work under Retroarch. They work on the Xbox itself for anything that the Xbox supports mouse input for, but Retroarch just doesn't support mice with this version yet. I'm hoping we might see an update in the future that'll implement it. But as for now, none of this light gun stuff is going to work. So the next option available to us is the CPU speed. So you can actually overclock the emulated CPU. So there are a number of Genesis, Master System, Game Gear, Sega CD games that have hardware-induced lag. They're pushing the hardware too much and they start to lag. So with this, you can actually increase the emulated CPU speed to try to remove some of that hardware-induced lag. Do know that it can break some things, so just experiment with it on a game-by-game basis. I personally don't use it too much for Genesis games because I kind of like having the hardware lag. It's just what these games are meant to be. But hey, choice is a good thing, and that is one of the best things about emulation. You can remove it if you want to. And then our last option available in Genesis Plus GX is to remove the sprite limit. So by default on Master System hardware, you have 8 sprites per line before it starts to flicker, and Genesis gives you 20. With this option toggled on, you can remove the limits entirely to make sure there is no graphical flickering. There are a couple games that would use sprite flicker to basically do like special effects, so I just prefer to leave it off personally. But again, choice is yours. But once you have your Genesis Plus GX core options set the way you want, make sure you save them as a core override, so that way every time you load up Genesis Plus GX, these will be the settings that greet you. And then just to give you a brief demonstration of the LCD ghosting filter in a Game Gear game, gonna enable it here, and that is what it would look like. It does a really good job of mimicking the Game Gear screen. Like, it may look really hideous to you, but this is seriously what Game Gear games used to look like back in the day, only much bigger and sharper. But yeah, that ghosting, it does a really good job. Like, it's really impressive, to be honest. But if you set your core override earlier, if you want to have ghosting enabled for any Game Gear or maybe certain Genesis games because you played them on a Nomad or something, you can go back into your quick menu and save these overrides as a game override. So that way, every time you load up a Game Gear game or Genesis games, if you want them to have the ghosting, they will have the ghosting. Now, something to keep in mind when emulating Genesis games is that by default you will be using a 3-button controller, as that is what every Genesis game will work with, and later games introduce 6-button controller support. But you can change between these in Genesis Plus GX by going into your quick menu, go down to Controls, Port 1 Controls, and then you can change between the different types of controllers, so joypad 3-button, 6-button, and even a Master System 2-button. So, bunch of different options that you could scroll between that you need to use to get your games to work correctly. Now, for the most part, Auto does a good job, but it doesn't really choose the 6-button controller, so a good majority of Genesis games will run with the 6-button controller enabled. There are a few that won't, so do be aware you will need to swap between these depending on the game. If you don't want to have to worry about it, you can always just leave it set to 3-button, but if you play any fighting games like Street Fighter, 3-button controllers really suck. But now that we've got Genesis Plus out of the way, let's talk about Picodrive. So the core options in Picodrive are a little bit different, not too much different, but if you go into your quick menu, go to Options, you will see that we actually start with our controller input devices, so we can choose between the 6-button or 3-button pad right here, and we can do that for both controller ports. Then we have the no sprite limit once again, so you can turn this on and off as you see fit. I prefer off for authenticity's sake. We don't need to touch the Mega CD RAM cart, we're not using Picodrive to play Mega CD games, but if you do have 32x CD games, you can enable the RAM cart or disable it as you see fit. There's only like, 2 or 3 Sega CD 32x games. Region, you can choose between Japan, US, Europe. We're going to skip over aspect ratio, we're going to skip over overscan, and then once again we have the emulated CPU overclock, so you can increase this to remove hardware lag if you see fit. Leave dynamic recompiler on. Then there's the audio filter, so you could set the low pass filter on to try to mimic the Genesis Model 1 sound a little bit more. Then you could also change the low pass filter percentage. Renderer, leave this on accurate. And then last option is sound quality, and 44.1 is the max value that we could do for Picodrive. But same thing as before, once you have your core options changed to how you want them, you can go down to the overrides button over here and save the core overrides. Now, one last thing I want to go over before we send you on your merry way is how to do shaders. So going into the shaders tab, you can enable shaders by pressing A on the slider, but you want to make sure that you actually have shaders downloaded. So go back out to your Retroarch main menu if you haven't done so already, and you can scroll over to the main menu, Online Updater, and update GLSL shaders. And once those are downloaded and extracted, you can just go back into the quick menu, shaders, and then we can load a shader preset. So for me, I am just too fond of my CRT Easy Mode shader, so that is what I always choose for these types of emulation. So I can turn it on. And then I'm going to save this as a core preset. So that way, every time I load up a 32X game, this is the shader that will greet me, and I just absolutely love how it looks. And now I'm going to do the same thing for Genesis Plus GX. I'm going to apply that CRT Easy Mode shader. And I'm going to save it as the core preset. And again, I just absolutely love the way this makes games look. Like, it just looks so good to me. So now anytime we load up anything on Genesis Plus GX, this will be the shader that is greeting us. and that might not be exactly what you want for Game Gear games. So, with Game Gear games, they still look good with this shader on, but they're not quite as authentic as you can make them. So if we go into our shader menu once again, we can load up a shader preset, shaders GLSL, and we could go down to the handheld folder. From here, we could go to console border, and we could find Game Gear console border shaders. Here we are. So I like to use the 4X1. And it just gives us this awesome little Game Gear border that we could play our Game Gear games in. And it just looks absolutely fantastic. Especially with the ghosting on, like, it's kind of a fun little authentic experience. But of course, if you want to make sure that none of that clipping is occurring that you see on the sides of the screen right now, you can back out to the Retroarch main menu. Go to the video tab. Go down to scaling, and we could change the aspect ratio to 16:9. And then we could get rid of integer scaling as well. That way we don't have any clipping on this handheld border. And it just looks friggin' sweet. Of course, you don't have to have the ghosting enabled. I just like having it enabled just because I'm used to seeing my Game Gear games like this. I can understand that it would be super distracting to a lot of people. I just grew up with this system. This is what it was to me. So I like being able to emulate that on a bigger screen. But do be aware, if you need to set up Game Gear specific shaders and you want to have like the no clipping thing, you will need to save the core overrides once again for every Game Gear game to make them like this. And then you will also need to save the shader as a game preset, so that way when you load up the game, this is what will greet you. Otherwise, it will just load up the normal Genesis Plus GX shader that you had before. So just as a quick demonstration, we're going to load back up into Sonic. And we have our nice integer scaled easy mode CRT filter applied to it. For some reason it has ghosting on, not sure what that's about, but whatever. Just turn that off. But there we go, CRT easy mode, beautiful. And now we could go back over here. I'm going to reload into Lion King, and it should load up the Game Gear border for us. Just like so. And again, you will need to do this for every Game Gear game you want to have look differently than what the rest of the Genesis Plus GX games will look like. And that's really going to do it as far as emulating Genesis, Master System, Sega CD, Game Gear, and 32X is concerned. This was a bit of a beefier episode today just because there's a lot of systems to cover for these two little cores. There really is a lot you could play when it comes to Genesis, 32X, Sega CD, Game Gear, Master System. There's just so many classics, so many great multi-plat games. And overall, it's just really fun to be able to experience more of my Genesis library on the Xbox Series X and S. Like, I ripped my Genesis mini games, I've ripped my own cartridge collection, dumped some of the games I've gotten off of Steam. Like, it's so easy to get Genesis games. So being able to consolidate them all into one platform is just a ton of fun for me. But as always, if you happen to have any questions about getting your Genesis library and all the other supported systems set up, just feel free to ask me in the comment section below. I will do my best to try to help you out. But if you could all now do me a massive favor and make sure you hit that like or dislike button, just depending how much you like today's video. And if you haven't already, make sure you hit that sub button so that way you can see when new videos just like this go live. Got quite a few cores left in the pipeline for Xbox Series X and S, so hope to have you all along for that ride. But this is a very long video, so let's just go ahead and close this one out. As always, thank you so much again for watching. Thank you for everything you've done to support the channel over the last little while. It's made a huge difference for us, so thank you all so much for that. But until next time, all my wonderful internet peeps, stay awesome, and we will see you all back next video.